Good morning. So today's the Talmud Torah sponsor of the month, Dovi and Nina Elman, in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming a bas mitzvah. May she continue to be a source of nachas to the entire family. And the week of learning sponsored by Alan and Sherry Steinmetz in honor of Allison and Adam Steinmetz's anniversary, and the wonderful shiurim offered by Suburban and Rabbi Silber. Okay, today's daf is daf mem hey. We're going to pick up on daf mem daled amud beis, about 15 lines up from the bottom, where we're going to say Ela Yalef Migulei Nachrim. So just to reorient ourselves to what we were talking about here, that we had Rabbi Yochanan who learned that Heter Mitztaref LeIsser, that when you're trying to create the Kezayis, you could have, as long as you have some Isser, if it's added with some Heter, collectively it's Mitztaref LeIsser and it's considered a full Kezayis. Rabbi Yochanan, however, said that halacha only applies by Nazir. And he learns it from Mishras, the idea that you could soak something, that it would take the taste, and we talk about soaking the bread, where the wine is soaking the bread in wine. The wine is the Isser, it's less than a Kezayis, but it's Mitztaref with the bread. So we say that's a special halacha by Nazir according to Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara asked, well, wait a second, don't we need Mishras, that language of that pasuk, which teaches us that tam ki'ikr, that if the taste of something becomes infused in something, that's going to create Isser. And we bring the, so basically what happens is we end up with the idea that Mishras, that pasuk, Rabbi Akiva is using it to learn Mitztaref LeIsser, that Heter Mitztaref LeIsser, that you combine the lesser portion of a Kezayis of Heter with Isser, and the Rabbanan are going to say we learn from there tam ki'ikr. So the Gemara then was trying to figure out, where did Rabbi Akiva, okay, so if Rabbi Akiva learns Mishras to teach tam ki'ikr, that taste infuses and creates Isser, where did Rabbi Akiva get that idea? Because if he can't use Mishras for that, because he's using Mishras for Heter Mitztaref LeIsser, so then where does Rabbi Akiva learn tam ki'ikr? The Gemara said we tried to learn it from Basar B'chalav, and you said you can't learn it out from Basar B'chalav to everything else, because Basar B'chalav has unique chiddush in as much as you can soak the basar and chalav, and that doesn't matter, but if you cook it, then it immediately becomes that way. Okay, so we're trying to find a source for Rabbi Akiva, who uses Mishras for Heter Mitztaref LeIsser. Where does he know tam ki'ikr, that we look at the taste as infusing something and creating Isser? So says the Gemara, Ela Yalef Migulei Nachrim, that Rabbi Akiva should learn tam ki'ikr from Gilei Nachrim. Gil is the halacha as follows, that when the Jews came back from fighting Midian, so they were told that they had to take the pots and pans, whatever they took from the Midyanim, and they had to purify them through fire, through hot water, whatever the different materials, different ways. So the idea was, we see that Giyulei Nachrim lav taimim ba'amahu va'asar, hachinami loshna. So he says, don't you see? In other words, what was the concern? The pots and pans of the Midyanim weren't dirty. It was the idea that inside, they had absorbed in their walls tam, they had absorbed taste, and then when you're going to cook your kosher food in it, it's going to get some of the taste from the Midyanim food, and then it's going to make it aser, and you're not going to be able to eat it. So you see that tam ki'ikr, you learn from the fact that you have to be metaher the kalim of the Midyanim. So we should learn from there tam ki'ikr in general, and that's where Rabbi Akiva would learn it from, we say. V'Rabbanan, so wait a second, so then why can't the Rabbanan learn tam ki'ikr from Giyulei Nachrim, and why did they need to learn it from the pasuk of Mishras? So the Gemara says the Rabbanan don't want to learn tam ki'ikr from Giyulei Nachrim. Why? Because Giyulei Nachrim nami chideshu. Because Giyulei Nachrim has a unique element to it. So just like Basar B'chalav did, and therefore you can't learn from it to all cases, so too, I would say Giyulei Nachrim has a unique chiddush to it. What's the unique chiddush? Because generally speaking, we say no sin tam lefkam. I'll explain what that means in a second, is mutter, which we learn from the Vela, but here we see that it's aser. What's going on here? So no sin tam lefkam is the idea that if something adds taste, but the taste that it's adding is to the detriment of whatever's there, that nonetheless, so we're going to say, generally speaking, that's mutter. We learned that from Nevela, because Nevela, an animal that died without shchita, is generally speaking aser, but once it gets to the point that it's spoiled, so then we say you could eat it, it's no longer Nevela. So you see that once something reaches the stage where its taste is negative, it's no longer aser. So generally speaking, a negative taste is not aser. The Gemara assumes that because we have a general principle that beyond 24 hours, beyond a day, anything that's absorbed in the walls of a pot is going to become it only adds negatively. So nosin tam lifgam. So we're going to say as follows, that generally speaking, stuff that's in the walls of a pot is lifgam. Normally something that's pagam is mutter. So we would say we wouldn't have to worry about it. So from the fact that by the midyadim's kalim, we had to worry about the absorbed taste, even though it's lifgam, even though it's negative to what you're cooking in it. So that means that Gilei Nachrim has a unique chiddush, and therefore you shouldn't be able to learn it to other things, because normally nosin tam lifgam is mutter, and yet here we're saying nosin tam lifgam is aser. So that's why the Rabbanan say I wouldn't be able to learn it from Gilei Nachrim, and that's why I needed the pasuk of Mishras to teach me tam ke'ikr. So, okay, that's good. So you see that just like we asked this kasha on Rabbi Akiva also, is if when we proved basar b'chalav was unique, so how does Rabbi Akiva learn it? So too we're going to say now, this sounds like Gilei Nachrim is unique because nosin tam lefgam we're still saying is aser. So what would Rabbi Akiva do with that? How could he learn nosin tam lefgam in general? Rabbi Akiva could Rabbi Chia Breder Rav Huna. So he says no, because Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Chia Breder Rav Huna, who clarified the Amar. He said lo aser Torah ela b'kdei rabas yumo. Hilkoch lav nosin tam lefgamhu. He says no, because the halach of Gilei Nachrim ein achinami. If we would have said that any time that you have the pots of the minyanim, even if they hadn't used it in the prior 24 hours, you needed to kasher it, so then you would say that's actually a unique halacha, because once it's 24 hours, the taste is lifgam, and yet we're saying we need to clear it out. But Rav Chia Breder of Huna clarifies for us that when the Torah told the Jews that you had to kasher the kalim of the Midyanim, it was talking about kalim that they had used in the prior 24 hours. So at that point, it was not nosein tam lefgam, because it's only after it's been 24 hours in the walls of the pot that it becomes to its detriment. And when they were saying if you want to use these pots right now, right after you took them from the Midyanim, you need to kasher them, because you need to get rid of the tam that's in the walls, and it's not tam lefgam, so therefore it's not a chiddush, meaning it's not a unique concept, and therefore we should be able to learn out nosin tam lefgam to all cases. So says the Gemara, Rabbanan, what would the Rabbanan answer to that? Because if in fact, and we're assuming that the Rabbanan don't necessarily argue on Rav Chia Breder Rav Huna, if we're in fact talking about kalim that are less than 24 hours since the Midyanim used it, it's not lefgam, and therefore why is it a chiddush that you can't learn nosin tam lefgam from Gilei Nachrim to all cases? So the Gemara says, because the Rabbanan hold Kedei Rabas Yuma Nami Lo Efsher de Lo Pagma Porta. They're saying, no, the Rabbanan could agree with Rav Chia Breder of Huna that it was within 24 hours, but the Rabbanan are of the opinion that anything that's absorbed in the walls of a pot, even less than 24 hours, is somewhat lifgam. And therefore, according to the Rabbanan, Gilei Nachrim is a unique chiddush, and you cannot use it to learn nosin tam lefgam for all cases. So that's why the Rabbanan needed to learn from Mishras. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, says no. If we're talking within 24 hours, it's not lifgam, and therefore you see that we worry about the tam that's in the walls of the kalim of the Midyanim. So we should learn from there to all cases of nosin tam lefgam from Gilei Nachrim, and therefore the pasuk of Mishras is left available, and he's able to learn heter mitzaref le'isser. So Amalei Rav Acha Breder of Avia Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha Breder of Avia asked Rav Ashi a somewhat new thing. Midrabanan nishmal Rabbi Akiva. Why not learn from the Rabbanan to hear something from Rabbi Akiva? Basically, what the Gemara is going to ask now is Rabbi Akiva learns from Mishras that Nazir, that uniquely by Nazir, that the bread and the wine combine, because it's heter mitzaref le'isser. Rabbi Akiva is the one, Rabbi Yochanan said it only applies to Nazir, and he was expressing the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. So why in fact do Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan only learn to Nazir? Why not learn to all cases? He says, Milo Amri Rabbanan Mishras Litin Tam Ke'ikr Mikan Atadan L'chol Yisurin Shabbat Torah Rabbi Akiva Nami Mishras Laheter Mitzaref L'Isser Mikan Atadan L'chol Yisurin Shabbat Torah Kula. So what is he saying is as follows, that as we discussed, Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan argue about what do you do with the word Mishras. The Rabbanan apply it to Tam Ke'ikr, and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan later we see apply it to Heter Mitzaref L'Isser. So, and we saw in the case of Mishras, the word Mishras, which was written by Nazir, the Rabbanan used the Kal V'chomer to say if it applies by Nazir, which is Mekel, for sure it should apply by other things which are more Chomer. And the Rabbanan used the word Mishras to teach to all cases that nosin tam, that tam ke'ikr. So why, when Rabbi Akiva is using the exact same word Mishras, which is written by Nazir, he says it only applies by Nazir? Why not say just like that same word mishras, the Rabbanan used their halacha of tam ki'ikr, they used to apply to all instances. So why don't you use your usage of the word mishras, Rabbi Akiva, which you're using for heter mitzdaref le'isr? Why don't you learn out to all cases? Why do you say that it's only limited to the case of Nazir? So he says, Amar lei. So they answered as follows. Why did Rabbi Akiva not learn from mishras to all cases from Nazir, using the Kal V'chomer of the Chachamim? Mishum dahave Nazir v'chata shnei ksuvam ba'in ke'echad v'im melamdim. Why? Because einachinami, if the Torah would have only written mishras by Nazir, and we're learning from there that heter mitzdaref l'isser, that you combine less than a kazayas of heter with a less than a kazayas of isser to create something you're not allowed to eat. If it had only written that by Nazir, einachinami, I would be able to learn out from there to all cases across the Torah. But because the Torah wrote the concept of heter mitzdaref l'isser in two places, which we're going to see, one was Nazir, the other was chatas, that we're going to see from there, that therefore you cannot learn it out to all cases, and it's only going to apply by Nazir, and we'll see chatas. What's this concept? We've encountered this many times. The idea is as follows. If the Torah wanted to teach you a general law, it would say it once, and you would learn it to all parallel instances. So if the Torah wrote it in Nazir, you should learn it to all cases. If the Torah then took the time to write it in a second place, which in this place is chatas, it must be that it didn't want you to learn from one instance to all, and therefore wrote it twice, to tell you that these two cases it applies, other cases it doesn't apply. So that's why Rabbi Akiva would only use mishras to teach the case of Nazir, because the Torah chose to repeat itself by Nazir and Chatas to tell you those are the only two cases it applies, but not across the Torah. Where are the two places that it's written? Nazir Hada Amra, Nazir, which we already said, about soaking the wine in the bread. Chatas Maihi, where's the case that we see from Chatas that heter mitzdaref le'isr? The Gemara says the Sanya, because we learned in a Brisa. The Brisa teaches us that the pasuk says Kol asher yiga b'vsara yikdash. What this is talking about is that if you have meat that touches if you have meat that is kadshe kadishim, for example, that touches other meat, that we're going to see that it causes that meat to assume the kedusha of the meat that touched it. So the idea is anything that touches the basar of kadshe kadishim, yikdash itself becomes kaddish like the kadshe kadishim. So we learn that from the pasuk. Yachol afilu lo bala. So you might think, okay, maybe this is just if the kadshe kadishim meat touches, let's say, shlamim meat, that even if there was no absorption from the let's say the chatas meat to the shlamim meat, that nonetheless the shlamim meat would become like the chatas. Says the Gemara, Tamalomer bivsara, in its flesh, which tells you that basically there has to be some transference of Isser from the Kadshe Kadashim, Isser meaning because it's more Chomer, into the Shlamim, let's say, which is more Kal. So it actually has to have a transference. It's not just touch, but for example, if they would be hot, then the fats or the juices would mix between the two. So Ache Yivla Bivasar, until it actually gets absorbed. Yikdash, what does it mean that it becomes Kadash? That if let's say Chatas meat touched Shlamim meat, Leos Kamo, it immediately assumes the status of that chatas meat. For example, Shim Sulahi Tipasel, that if the chatas meat were to become puzzle, that this meat that touched it would also become puzzle. Vim Ksherehi, let's say it touched it and there was a transference of liquid, but it didn't become puzzle, so then the shlamim meat now assumes the unique characteristics of Kadshe Kadashim for Tochel Kechomer Sheba, that it has to be treated as if it's like Kadshe Kadashim, because it has in it juices of Kadshe Kadashim. So for example, it can only be eaten by Zichrei Kahuna. It has to be eaten in the Beis HaMikdash. All of the halachas, the time that you have to eat it, all of these halachas that apply to chatas would now apply to this meat that was touched by the shlamim. And so the idea is that the sum of the Kadshe Kadashim, the chatas meat or its juices went into the shlamim meat. Now it's not necessarily enough to be a kazayas, and yet you see that if you're going to eat the shlamim meat now, some of which is kadashim status and some of which is shlamim, that you have to treat the whole thing as kadshe kadashim. So you see the idea that heter mitzdaref le'isr, that even though there's only a little bit of it that's Kadshe Kadashim, we treat the whole thing like Kadshe Kadashim. So therefore, you now have two sources, Chatas and Nazir, to tell you that Heter Mitzdaref L'Isser, and therefore, says the Gemara, that's why Rabbi Akiva only learns it to Nazir and Chatas. He would not learn it to Kol HaTorah Kula using the Kal V'chomer from Nazir. Again, had it only been written by Nazir, he could make a Kal V'chomer just like the Rabbanan. But from the fact that it was written by Nazir and Chatas, he can no longer do that. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan Nami, Nehavi Nazir v'Chatas Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad, Ve'en Melamden. So the Gemara says, well, wait a second. It's a good point. So you're saying, so this is actually an interesting thing, that this halacha that we're saying about the Kadshe Kadashim meat, infusing the Shlamim meat, is actually also an example of Tam Ke'ikr. And since the Rabbanan don't hold don't hold of Heter Mitzdaref L'Isser, because they use the pasuk of Mishras to teach you Tam Ke'ikr, why not say that what we see from this case of Kadshe Kadashim, that some of the taste goes into the Shlamim, you see Tam Ke'ikr, and why not say, so once you see that Tam Ke'ikr is written according to the Rabbanan, both by Chatas and by Nazir, so then rather than learn from Nazir to Kol HaTorah Kula that Tam Ke'ikr, why not say Tam Ke'ikr should only apply in the case of Nazir and Chatas, because it's written twice, and Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad Ein Melamdim, and therefore, unlike the Rabbanan who tried to learn out Tam Ke'ikr to the whole Torah, you should only apply it to Nazir and Chatas. So the Gemara says, Amri Hano Mitzrach Tzrichi. They said no, because Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad Ein Melamdim is only true if they're not teaching you unique halachos, but here we needed it to teach you unique halachos, so it's not Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad. We're going to see in a second what's the uniqueness. Rabbi Akiva. So what would Rabbi Akiva say to that? So Rabbi Akiva responds, says, not so fast. Don't tell me you need them each, because I could show you that you could have written one and you would know the other. My tzrichi. What do you mean that you need them both? Bishlama ikasav rachmana b'chatas. Had the Torah only written the halachos of Tam Ke'ikr by Chatas, lo gomer nazimine. So I would say, yeah, you're right. In that case, I couldn't learn to other things, because I wouldn't learn Nazir, for example, from it. The chula mikachim lo gamrinon. Because generally speaking, chulin is less severe than kachim. So maybe I would tell you, if the Torah told us Tam Ke'ikr only by Chatas, I would say, I don't know it anywhere else. Because I only see Tam Ke'ikr by Kachim, but I wouldn't know it by Chulin. So therefore, says the Rabbanan, I would need to, Rabbi Akiva is saying for the Rabbanan, I would need to say that I needed to add it by Nazir. It wasn't enough to just write it by Chatas, by Kachim. But Rabbi Akiva says not so fast. So fine, it's true. If it only wrote Chatas, I would need another pasuk or another source to tell me to apply it to other things. But Ella lichtav Rachmana ben Nazir, v'tesi Chatas, v'tigmar minei, the ha kol isurin shabatorah kagamar min Nazir. So he says, but you Rabbanan, what you're saying doesn't make sense, because why not treat it as Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad? Because the reality is, the Torah could have just written Nazir, and as you, the Rabbanan yourself, proved, there's a Kal V'chomer to learn from Nazir to all cases, and we would learn, so we would learn from Nazir to Kachim, non-Kachim, everything, and yet the Torah chose to write it by Chatas. So why not say, says Rabbi Akiva would say back to the Rabbanan, why not say that it could have written only by Nazir and I would have known Chatas, from the fact that the Torah added it to write Tam Ke'ikr by Chatas, I'm going to learn out that it should only, Tam Ke'ikr should only apply by Nazir and by Chatas. So the Gemara says, okay, that's a good point. Rabbanan, so what would the Rabbanan say? Why not? Why is it not Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad? It could have written only Nazir, and it chose to write Nazir and Chatas. So the Gemara says, Amri lach mitzri tzrichi. Mitzri tzrichi Chatas laheter mitzaref l'Isser, v'chulin mikachim l'gamar, u'mishras litein Tam Ke'ikr. So what we're saying is as follows, that we're going to reverse what we said before. The Gemara's kasha was, why not say that Tam Ke'ikr is taught both by Chatas and by Nazir, and therefore it should be Shnei Ksuma Ba'in Ka'echad, and we assumed that the case of Chatas, the Rabbanan only hold of Tam Ke'ikr. They never told us the halacha of Heter Mitzaref L'Isser, so you have two sources for Tam Ke'ikr. So now the Gemara is answering and saying, no, actually the Rabbanan also buy into the concept of Heter Mitzaref L'Isser, and they hold Tam Ke'ikr. So how does it work? Where do they see Heter Mitzaref L'Isser? They see it by Chatas. And where do they see Tam Ke'ikr? They see that from Nazir. So now the Gemara is saying as follows. That's why the Rabbanan are able to learn from Nazir to everywhere else, because it's only written in one place, and we learn Tam Ke'ikr from Nazir, and we learn to everything else. Now, what about what's written by Chatas? The Rabbanan agree that Heter Mitzaref L'Isser by Chatas. But once you're learning it from Chatas only applies by Kachim, not by Chulin. So what we're left off that the Rabbanan hold Heter Mitzaref L'Isser by Kachim, but not by Chulin, and they hold Tam Ki'ikr by everything. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, Tarvayu L'Heter Mitzaref L'Isser, so we're leaving off and saying as follows, that Rabbi Akiva, so we're going to say as follows, that Rabbi Akiva, they're actually very limited area of disagreement between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Akiva. They both hold of the concept of Tam Ki Ikar. Rabbi Akiva learns it from Giyulei Nachrim, and the Rabbanan say Giyulei Nachrim is a Chiddush, so I can't learn it from there, so I need the pasuk of Mishras. But they both agree Tam Ki Ikar applies in all cases, whether from Giyul or from Nazir. Now, Heter Mitzaref L'Isser, they also both hold of in a case of Kachim, because the Rabbanan learn it from Chatas, whereas Rabbi Akiva has the pasuk of Mishras left open to teach it by Nazir, and it's written by Chatas, so therefore Rabbi Akiva is going to say, it's Shnei Ksuvim Abayim Kechad, so therefore I can't learn it to anything else, but Heter Mitzaref L'Isser will apply by the case of Nazir and the case of Chatas, but only those two cases. Okay, so therefore what's actually the distinction between them two? They're both going to hold that Heter Mitzaref L'Isser because it's written by Chatas. So the Rabbanan and Rabbi Akiva will hold that. The only difference between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Akiva comes out by Nazir. Because the Rabbanan are going to say, I only know it by Kachim, so I only know it by Chatas. Rabbi Akiva is going to say, no, I also know it by Nazir, because it's written by Nazir Mishras, so therefore I apply it by Nazir and Chata, so therefore Rabbi Akiva is adding the concept of Nazir. And why doesn't he learn from Nazir to Kol HaTorah Kula using the Kal V'chomer? Because since it's also written by Chatas, it's Shnei Ksuvim Abayim Kechad, Ein Melamdim. Okay, sorry if that's complicated, but we gotta move on. Okay, Amar Le Rav Ashi Le Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, Elahadis Sanya. So wait a second. So what about this that we learned in the Brisa? Mikol asher yeyaseh migefen hayayin michartzanim v'adzog. So he says that the Brisa tells us, the pasuk says that the Nazir, if he takes anything that's made from wine, whether it's the seeds or the skin of the grapes, limud alisuri Nazir shemistarfen zem zeh. So the Brisa tells us that we see from that pasuk that if you have, let's say, a half a kazayas of grape skins and a half a kazayas of grape pits, that those are going to be mitzaref to a kazayas. So now the Gemara asks, well, wait a second. According to Rabbi Akiva, who says heter is mitzaref l'isser, hashtal Rabbi Akiva isser v'heter mitzarefin, isser v'isser mi bayi. He says, why do I need the pasuk and why do I need the brisa to tell us that two forms of isser by Nazir combine? Grape skins and grape seeds are going to combine. Why do I need that? At the end of the day, if even Isser, if even Isser v'heter combine to make a kazayas, then surely two forms of Isser should for sure combine. So it's a kasha on Rabbi Akiva. If you're saying that the halacha of heter mitzaref l'isser applies by Nazir, and it applies heter to combine with isser to make up a kazayas, surely two forms of isser by kazayas would combine. Amar Le, he says, you're right. Theoretically, I would have known it from heter v'isser mitzarefin, I would have known isser v'isser, but isser v'isser has an added element on top of isser v'heter. What is that? Isser v'heter b'vasachas. In order for heter mitzaref l'isser to say that a partial heter, partial isser combined to create a kazayas, that only applies if you eat it together at the same time. But isser v'isser b'zachar zeh. But if you eat, let's say, grape skins, half a kazayas of grape skins, and then half a kazayas of grape pits, at the end of the day, even though you eat them separate, as long as it's peketei achilas pras, they're going to combine. So that's why the Torah needed to tell us, that's why the Brisa needed to tell us, because we wouldn't have known it from heter mitzaref l'isser, because heter mitzaref l'isser is only if you eat it all in one shot, versus isser v'isser are mitzaref, even if you eat them separately, as long as you do it in the peketei achilas pras. Okay, says the Mishnah. Batzak shebesidke areva im yesh kazayis b'makom echad chayav levayer v'im lav bato b'miuto. So he says as follows, that if you have dough that's in the sidike areva, it's in the cracks of the areva, is like a feeding trough. that the animals would eat from. So what's happened here? That the dough was kind of filling in the cracks. It was serving a function in the bottom of this, in part of this areva. We'll see exactly what it means. So you have the dough in the cracks of the areva. So we're saying as follows: if there's a kazayas in one place that's a kazayas worth of dough, then you have to take it out of the areva and you have to do bir chametz on it. But if not, if it's less than a kazayas, then it's batal b'miyuto, and you're not even going to need to remove the dough from the trough. We're going to see in the Gemara what this means. Continues the Mishnah, v'chein le'inyan atuma, so too as relates to tuma, when you're being tovel and areva, if the areva becomes tameh and you want to make it tahar, and you're going to be tovel it, im makbid alav chodzetz, if you're makbid on the dough, meaning you don't want it there, right? That is not serving a function for you, then it's going to be a chatzitza. Like anything, this is true in general. When you go to the mikvah, if there's something interposing, if you want it there, it's not a chatzitza, but if you don't want it there, it is a chatzitza. So we're saying as follows: if you want the dough there, then if you don't want the dough there, then it's going to be a chatzitza. V'imrotza b'kiyumo harehu kareva. But if you want the dough there filling in the crack, so then it's not going to be considered a chatzitza. And again, we're going to see in the Gemara exactly what these things mean. So picks up the Gemara. Amar Yehuda Shmuel lo shanu el b'makom she'en asuyin lechazek, al b'makom she'asuyin lechazek eino chayav levayer. So he says as follows: that the Mishnah said. The Mishnah basically said, if you have a kazayas of dough, it's a problem. Less than a kazayas is not a problem. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, when did they say that? They learned that only if it's in a place she'en asuyin lechazek. Lechazek, it basically means that it's not, it's in the area that's not the bottom of the trough. Either Rashi understands that it means that asuyin lechazek means it's there to hold water, means you need to make it waterproof. Others understand that that the dough is there to strengthen the areva. But whatever the point is, the idea is that if it's a place she'en asuyin lechazek, meaning the side walls of the trough, if it's there, that's when it matters whether it's a kazayas or not. But if we're talking about the bottom of the trough, where the dough is serving an important function of giving it its waterproof nature, it's filling in the cracks, eino chayav levayer, that you don't need to destroy it at all, even if it's going to be a kazayas. Mechlal the pachos mi kazayas afil b'makom she'en asuyin lechazek eino chayav levayer. So he says, so basically what are we saying? We're saying, if the dough is on the bottom of the trough, it doesn't matter whether it's more or less than a kazayas, it's serving an important function, and it's part of the areva, and it's not considered chametz. If it's on the side walls of the trough, which are not there to hold water, and they're not serving as really a function, so then the question would be as follows: is it a kazayas? In which case it's a problem, and if it's not a kazayas, it's not a problem. So this is a mako version, essentially saying that as long as it's on the bottom, it doesn't matter how big it is, it's not going to be chametz, that you have to get rid of it. And if it's on the sides, depends whether it's a kazayas or not. Ika demasni la seifa, but there are others who learn Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, that's going on the seifa, that the seifa said, v'im lav, basically the Mishnah said that if you have this dough that's in the cracks of the areva, if it has a kazayas, you have to get rid of it, and if not. So earlier we said that only applies on the sidewalls, but the bottom, doesn't matter whether it's a kazayas or not. But others learn that they said v'im lav, but if it's a kazayas, if it's less than a kazayas, batal b'miyuto, Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda said Shmuel, lo shanu el b'makom asi lechazek. When did they say that it matters whether it's a kazayas or not? Is if it's on the bottom where it's serving an important function. So then we say that if it's a kazayas, even though it's important, serving an important function, it's going to be chametz. But if it's less than a kazayas, it's okay. But it's a part that's not the bottom of the trough, but the sides of the troughs, the side of the trough chayav levayer, that you're going to have to do bir chametz, even if it's less than a kazayas. Mechlal, this implies the kazayas afilu b'makom asu lechazek chayav levayer. This implies that if the chametz, if the dough is on the bottom of the trough, even though it's serving an important function of waterproofing, nonetheless, you're going to need to get rid of it. So, we have the first version, which is very mako, which is saying On the floor, serving an important function, even more than a kazayas. On the walls, you can leave it there as long as it's less than a kazayas. The second version is saying on the floor, you can only leave it as less than a kazayas. If it's more than a kazayas, you can't even leave it when it's serving a function. And if it's on the sides, for sure, then you can't even do it if it's pachos mikazayas. So the first version, mekel, second version, machmer. Says the Gemara, tani kolishna kama, tani kolishna baso. We learn one brisa like the first lashon, we learn another brisa like the second lashon. Tanya kolishna kama, we learned one like the more mekel version, which says as follows. But like shebesidake areva, that if you have dough that's in the cracks of an areva. So we're talking about the floor where it's serving an important function. Eino chotzets ve'eino over. It's not going to be considered a chatzitza because it's serving an important function, and he's not going to be over on chametz because we say it's part of the areva. Ubemakom. So that ubemakom shein asur lechazek, and in a place where it's not the floor, it's the walls. Chotzets over. That then it's going to be a chatzitza and it's going to be over on chametz. B'met dvar marmurim. When is it said? B'kazayis, with the kazayis. Avol pachas b'kazayis. Afilu b'makom she'en asur l'chazek. And a chotzes ve'en over. So he says, but if it's less than a kazayis, even when it's on the walls, it's not a chatzitza. You're not over. So this brisa is clearly saying that if it's on the floor, even more than a kazayis. If it's on the wall, depends. If it's a kazayis, you have to take it off. If it's less than a kazayis, you don't. So that's like the more mekel version. V'tanya kolishna basar, we learned another brisa like the second lashon, which is more machmer. So how did that go? Batzek shebesidek areva, that if you have the dough that's in the cracks of the areva, but makom asur l'chazek, if it's on the floor where it's serving an important function, eino chotzeis ve'eino over. So as long as it's on the floor, it's not, and we'll see this is talking about a pachos mikzayis. As long as it's on the floor, and it's serving an important function, if it's less than a kazayas, it's okay. But makom shein asur l'chazek, but if it's on the walls where it's not serving an important function, chotzeitz over, it's going to be a chatzitz, and you're going to be over, as we're going to now see. But medvar marmurim, when do we say that? But pachos mikazayas. So when do we say that on the floor you could leave it? Pachos mikazayas. When do we say on the walls you have to remove it? Also pachos mikazayas. Meaning, in this view, if it's a kazayas, doesn't matter whether it's on the walls or the floors, you're going to need to get rid of it. But if it's a kazayas size, afilu b'makom asur l'chazek, even if it's on the floor where it's serving an important function, it's waterproofing, chotzeitz over, it's going to be a chatzitza, and you're going to be over on chametz. So we have basically a mekel version of the understanding the Mishnah, we have a machmer version of understanding the Mishnah, and we have a brisa that supports each of them. So ask the Gemara, kashina adadi, you just had two conflicting brisas. One said like the mekel version, and one said like the machmer version. So how do you have these conflicting brisas? So Rav Huna said, Sami kilta mekame chamirta. He said, you're right. So let's get rid of the mekel version. Mefarshim discuss why dafka the mekel version, but okay, let's get rid of the mekel version of the brisa. We're going to assume that that's a mistake, and we're going to go with the machmer version. The machmer version says, if it's on the floor, as long as it's less than a kazayas, you can leave it there. If it's more than a kazayas, you have to get rid of it. And if it's on the walls, even less than a kazayas, you have to get rid of this dough. So Rav Yosef says, Tanai shakalto me'ama? What? There are no Tanaim who can argue in the world? You had a conflict in the Brisas. I'll tell you that it's a machlokas Tanaim. Tanaihi, it's a machlokas Tanaim. So who are the two opinions? The Sanya, because we learned in the Brisa as follows. Hapas she'ifsha chayev levayer. That if you have a bread, which was chametz, obviously, that became, and this is talking before Pesach, that it became moldy, chayev levayer, that you need to get rid of it when Pesach time comes. Why? Why not say that at the end of the day it's not roi lachila because it's moldy and people don't eat moldy bread? Says the Gemara, because what can you do with moldy bread? You can grind it up and then use it as a leavening agent to be machmitz other breads. So therefore, even though a person is not going to eat moldy bread serves a function as sa'ar. It serves a function as a leavening agent, and leavening agents apply, even yeast itself is generally speaking, a leavened bread is generally speaking not something people eat anyway, and yet it's a problem. So the Tanakama is pointing out that moldy bread can still serve a function, because it's a leavening agent. Now, the Mefarshim discuss what about it once it's ein aroi lachilas kelev, but we don't have to get into that right now. So Rav Shimon ben Elazar says to the Tanakama, "B'med dvar mamurim." When do we say that something that is no longer edible for humans, that it's nonetheless chametz b'mekuyemes la'achila, when it's still there in its category as food. Aval kofes sa'ar sheyichad al yeshiva batla. So, but if you were to have a lump of sa'ar, you have this really big lump of leavening agent that you decide, I'm no longer using it for food, and I'm going to use it as a chair. So then it's batal, and because it's not really edible, and because you've removed it from its category of sa'ar to say that I'm going to use it as a chair, so you're able to have this big pile of leavening agent be a chair. So that is Reb Shimon ben Elazar. So says the Gemara, Midam Reb Shimon ben Elazar batla. So Reb Shimon ben Elazar, the Gemara understands, was not coming to clarify the Tanakama, he's coming to argue with the Tanakama. So from the fact that Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that when you make yeast or a leavening lump into a chair, it's batal, Michlal the Tanakama is lo batla, that the Tanakama holds is not batal. So Alma, so what do you see? You see kasavar kol kazayas, afagav the mevato lo batal, that when you have a kazayas that has become batal as food and it's being used for some other function, it's not batal. So we see the Tanakama says, even if you recategorize something outside of the category of sa'ar and say I'm going to use it as a chair, it doesn't help. And according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, it does help. So therefore what? So back to our brysas. We had one brysa that said, if you have dough that's sealing up the floor, so it's serving an important function as a waterproofing function, the first version said that's no problem, it's batal. So that's going to be just like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, who says even if I have a big mound of leavening agent, I could turn it into a chair. So therefore, he would be the one who says that when it's serving a waterproofing function, it's been removed from its category as chametz, and now you're able to leave it there because it's serving a waterproofing function. Whereas the Tanakama, who says just because you reutilized it to something else doesn't take it out of its category of chametz, he would say it doesn't matter. So as long as it's less than a kazayas, fine. I'll say it's batal to the areva, but more than a kazayas, I'm not going to say it. So we said, so here Rav Yosef is saying those two conflicting brises, you don't have to get rid of one. One is Rav Shimon ben Elazar, one is the Tanakama. So the Gemara says, Abaye said to him, Taratza b'kazayis pachas m'kazayis mitaratza. So the Gemara says, well, wait a second. You're trying to say that we had two brises. One was mekel, one was machmer. But the one that was mekel in two senses. It was mekel in the sense that if something's on the floor and serving a waterproofing function, it's not chametz. So enachinami, that could be Rav Shimon ben Elazar. But it also had a second chiddush, which is if it's on the sides of the walls, if it's less than a kazayas, you don't need to remove it. That we don't see from Rav Shimon ben Elazar. So how could you prove that the first Meiko Brisa, which had two kulos, is Rav Shimon ben Elazar? Rav Shimon ben Elazar supports one of the kulos, the one where it's serving a waterproofing function, but it doesn't prove anything about the second kula, which is that when it's less than a kazayas on the walls, you don't need to remove it. So the Gemara says, you're right. So Elahavaha Rav Shimon ben Elazar. So rather, we're going to explain the two conflicting Brisas in a different way. That we're actually going to say that they're not conflicting at all. They're both going in the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Elazar, and I'm going to read it first, and then we'll explain what's going on. V'lo kasha, it's no kasha. Haba makam lisha, shaloba makam lisha. One brisa is talking about in the place where you need, and one is talking about the place where you don't need. Amr Rashi said, I'll explain this all in a second. Lo tema shaloba makam lisha agaba da agana. Don't assume that when it says not, when it's making a distinction and saying one's in the place where you need, one's in the place where you don't need, that need with a K, that the one that says, when it says it's not in the makom of lisha, the place where you're doing the kneading, that's a gaba dagana on the outside of the trough where you're doing the kneading. Ella asifsa dagana, but rather we're talking about the lip of the agana. So it's the top of this trough or whatever it is the keli we're talking about here. So the Gemara says, Pshita, of course, why would I think that it's talking about the outside? You don't need something on the outside. So the Gemara says, Ma'u de tema, I might have thought, Zimna de atif, umati lahasam, I might have thought that since the dough, when you're kneading it, sometimes comes over the edge and reaches the outside, I might have thought so, Kamash Malan, therefore it tells us not. So basically, what's going on here is the Gemara gave a teretz. Rav Ashi clarified what we're talking about. And we're making a distinction between the area where you did the kneading and the area you didn't do the kneading. So what is Abaya talking about? So what we're basically going to say is Abaya understands that there's three parts to this keli. There's going to be the floor, where the floor is serving an important function. The dough that's in the cracks is waterproofing. There's going to be the area above the floor, which is going to be the walls, where when it doesn't hold water, so it doesn't need waterproofing, but when you're kneading the dough is going on those walls. And then there's going to be the lip, where the dough really doesn't typically go. Okay, fine. So we have three categories: bottom, sides, and lip, the top. And now we're going to say as follows, that we had a brisa, one brisa that said, we're now saying both brises are like Rav Shimon ben Elazar. So Rav Shimon ben Elazar is the one who says if it's serving an important function, then you could have even more than a kazayas. So now we're saying as follows, that everyone's going to agree. If it's the bottom of the floor, it goes like Rav Shimon ben Elazar, you could have more than a kazayas. If it's the sides, then we're going to say that the sides, it depends whether it is a kazayas or not. And if it's the top, then it doesn't matter whether it's a kazayas or not. You cannot have chametz there. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our two brisas. One brisa said said that there's one case where it doesn't matter. If it's in the place where you're holding the water, it doesn't matter whether it is a kazayas or not. That's going to be going on the floor of the thing where it's serving an important function. And then that brisa continued and said, when do we distinguish between a kazayas or not kazayas? Is going to be in that middle part, that walls, the lower walls. So then it depends whether it's a kazayas or not. Now what this brisa does not discuss is what happens when it's further up. But this brisa would agree if it's further up, if it's by the lip, then you can't have it anyway. But the first brisa, which says one case it doesn't matter whether it's a kazayas or not, it's okay. That's talking about a floor. The case where it said it cares whether it's a kazayas or not was talking about the middle category, the walls. But it would agree that the top of the walls you're not allowed to have even pachos mikazayas. But that part is not said in the first brisa. The second brisa, which said there's an area where it depends whether it's a kazayas or not, we're going to say that second brisa agrees with the first. It's just talking about the middle. It's not talking about the floor. Because this is Rav Shimon ben Elazar, who everyone who would hold that on the floor, you could have even more than a kazayas. So when the second brisa starts by distinguishing between a kazayas and not a kazayas, it's talking about that middle level, the walls. And when the second brisa says that there's something that it doesn't matter whether or not it's a kazayas, that it's still a problem, that's talking about the upper part of the walls. So basically what we're saying is everyone agrees it's Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Floor could be more than a kazayas. Walls depends whether it's a kazayas or not. And the top, it is even if it's less than a kazayas. It's just that the first brisa talks about floors and walls, and the second brisa talks about walls and top. So that's why it seems that they're arguing with one another, but they're not. They're just, everything is Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Everyone agrees with these three categories. Just the first brisa is addressing the bottom and the walls, and the second brisa is addressing the walls and the top. So that's why the first brisa said, even if it's more than a kazayas, it's okay because it's talking about the floors. When the first brisa said there's a distinction whether it's a kazayas or not, it was talking about the walls. The second brisa picks up and says there's a distinction whether it's a kazayas or not, that's talking about the walls. The second brisa finishes by saying there's a category where you can't have any chametz, even less than a kazayas, that's talking about the top. So therefore it answered the two brisas. Okay, says the Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, halacha Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rav, halacha Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Ask the Gemara, Eini, is that true that Rav says halacha Rav Shimon ben Elazar? Rav Shimon ben Elazar is the one who says if you recategorize something, it doesn't matter, it could be more than a kazayas. So Amar Rav Yitzchak Barashi, Amar Rav. Rav Yitzchak Barashi says also in the name of Rav, im toch panel betit betela, toch in lo toch lo. So the Gemara says, Rav Yitzchak Barashi says the name of Rav, if you have this big mound of leavening agent and you want to make it into a chair, so it depends. If you put plaster on it, so that's showing you want it to be a chair, not to use it as leavening agent, and therefore it's okay. But if you, implies, so the Gemara says the implication from that is, if you plaster it, yes, but if you don't plaster it, no. So that is going not, so mantana de masni, I'm sorry. So it says the Gemara, we have one psak of Rav that says halacha Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Shimon ben Elazar though is the one who says that if you reconstitute a leavening agent to be a chair, even without putting on plaster, it's okay. But then we're bringing another halacha of Rav that says you have to plaster it in order for it to be okay. So what's the deal? So the Gemara says, "Man de masniha lo masniha." That you're right. We have two statements in the name of Rav. One says you need a plaster in order to remove it from its category, and one says you don't. So the Gemara says it's one's passing like Rosh Shimon and Elazar, one is creating this plaster distinction. So we're going to say one of those is mistaken. Only one of them was said by Rav. Ikka the army, the others who say that it's all one statement. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav. The Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav, Ein halacha Rav Shimon and Elazar. Halacha is not like Rav Shimon and Elazar. De Amar, because as support for this, Rav Yitzchak bar Ashi, Amar Rav, Rav Yitzchak bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, Im tach paneh betit betela, that if you that the halacha is not like Rav Shimon and Elazar who says you don't even need to do anything to it, but rather if you're going to take this mound of leavening agent and try to turn it into a chair, you have to at least put the plaster on it. So that would be Rav's halacha. Okay, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, if we're talking about this trough that you were kneading the dough in, so we're going to say as follows: Shnei chatzai zeisim v'chut shel batzak beineihem. That let's say you have two half keziases of dough, and there's a little string of dough connecting them. So the question is, do we look at this? So this is on the walls of the areva. So we said before, if it's a kezias, it's a problem. If it's less than a kezias, it's not a problem. Going like Rosh Shimon and Elazar. So the question is, what happens if you have two half zayas sizes and there's a little string of dough connecting them? So do we say as follows: Kol she'ilu yinatal achut v'natal nimenu chayiv levayer v'imlav enu chayiv levayer. So he says, all right, here's the test. You go to that little string between the two and you pick it up. If both sides of the both half zaysim that's connected to this little string of dough come off the trough, so then that would be considered they're mitzdaref with one another, and therefore you have to get rid of it. But if you would pull the string, and all that would happen is the string of dough would disconnect, and the two half zaysim that are applied to the walls of the trough would stay there, then you don't need to do anything with it. Amar Ula said, Lo Amran El Bareva. When did we say that you could do this test of picking it up and that we don't consider the two half zaysim to combine? That's only talking about here where it's stuck on the walls of the trough, of the mixing trough. But if you have two half kazaysim on the floor of your house, chayiv levayer, you have to get rid of it because we consider them to combine with one another. Ask the Gemara, my taimo, what's the reason why on the trough we said it depends how strongly they're connected, but if they're not really connected, you could keep them there, but in the house we say that two half zaysim are going to combine. We're going to say, the zimnan dekanish lehuven nafli gabi adadi, because we're worried you're going to sweep up your house, and the two little half kezesim of dough are going to combine with one another on your floor, and then it's going to be a problem because it's going to be a kezayis of chametz in your house. Amar Ula said, Baal b'marava. In Marava they asked the following question: Bayis v'aliyah mahu. That what's the halacha if you have a half of a kezayis of dough in the downstairs and a half of kezayis upstairs? Are we worried that you're going to sweep them and they're going to come together, and therefore you need to get rid of them, or you could just leave them on your floor because they're not going to combine? So the Gemara says, well, let's say I'm going to tell you that that's too remote, and you can have half a kazayas upstairs, half a kazayas downstairs. Bayis v'achsadra mahu. What about if you have one house and you have the portico outside, so like the porch? So the question is are we worried that fine, where you're not going to sweep from upstairs to downstairs, but maybe you're going to sweep from the porch to the inside? So what would be the halacha? And the Gemara says, and let's say you say the halacha would be that there's so much traffic between the porch and the house that we're worried you're going to sweep them together. Shnei batim zelif nimizeh. What happens if you have two houses, one inside from the other? What would be the halacha? Do we worry there's not as much traffic between two houses as there is between the porch and the house that belong to the same person? Mahu, do we have to worry that you're going to that they're going to get swept together from the two houses to each other? Says the Gemara Teku. Okay, I think we'll end here. We'll pick up here tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll be able to cover the full daf tomorrow.